Hi, I'm Ron Wook, your cybersecurity quarterback. This is my demystified version of the PCI requirements in the cloud. So the main thing you need to know is that the requirements are the same whether you're using the cloud infrastructure in your own facility or if you are using a cloud service. The only real difference is whether or not you own responsibility for things like encryption and also like physical structure items. With that said, what I have decided to do is to show you the very last slide of my presentation because I think this is what you really need to see and why you're here. So there's nothing worse than watching a video and waiting 20 minutes to get to what you need, right? So here are the things I think you need to know and I think why you're here. These are the items that you need to know or you need to have implemented if you're going to have credit card data in the cloud and you are trying to pass your PCI audit. If I am auditing you, these are some of the things, some of the things you need to have implemented. You may not, I would say you would have all of these things implemented. In some cases, there may be exceptions with business justification as to why you wouldn't have, like, for instance, data loss prevention tools. You may not have isolation of shared processes and resources for whatever reason. But as long as you have business justifications, some of those things can pass. But for the most part, these are the controls you need to have if you're going to implement your CDE in the cloud. All right, you got it? Now, each one of these needs its own video, to be totally honest. And I have videos for some of these items like segmentation and different items like PCI requirement 4. I think I made a video just for it. But anyway, so you may not, let's back all the way up now. You've seen the answers to the test, so to speak, when you're being audited. But let's back up just in case you're new to the whole cloud, environment and solutions services. So basically there are 4 types of cloud services. I have them here so you can see. Private clouds are operated solely by one organization, and for it to truly be private, it's located at that organization's location. So you may say, well, then it's not the cloud. Well, it's the cloud if it meets certain parameters, right? But only one company is using that particular cloud infrastructure. You can read here what the other clouds offer, but know the difference is all about segmentation and responsibility. We'll talk about responsibility in a little bit. I have a couple of slides about it. But the difference basically pertains to who is using the same infrastructure as you, as it relates to all of these cloud services. Like, for instance, the community cloud is shared by several organizations or companies with maybe possibly a shared interest. For instance, there's a cloud owned by security professionals, and these professionals upload their tools and tricks to this community cloud to share ideas. So that's an example of like a community cloud. A public cloud is a little different in that cloud service is made available to the general public, and it's owned by a single company or an organization selling cloud services. So let's say I own a cloud and I allow anyone to use my cloud to process data, but for a fee. By the way, cloud infrastructures don't have to be in one physical location. They can be in several locations, and most of them are located all around the world for redundancy purposes. And if you combine any of these 3, then you have a hybrid. So, and I pretty much figured you knew what a hybrid meant, but just in case you didn't, that's a hybrid cloud. So if you have any questions, if I need to dive a little deeper, let me know. Just send me a message and I'll either send you a message or make another video, depending on how extensive that question, the answer to that question may be. So here is a couple of clouds, 3, the main 3. Software as a service, right? If I'm a client and I use your cloud infrastructure and your cloud application to perform a job, then that model is a SaaS. For instance, I can upload my Python code to your website and use, your software to check it for errors. I am using your infrastructure and your application as a service. So if I upload it, save it, fix it, repackage it, and distribute it from your cloud service, that's SaaS. Now, if you use Google Docs, Salesforce, Google Calendar, you're using SaaS, Software as a Service, as an example, right? And an example of PASS, PAS, P-A-A-S. I said P-A-S-S, okay. It's like Microsoft Azure, right? Google App Engine, Matchmaker if you use that. They offer development tools, configuration management, and deployment platforms. So an example of infrastructure as a service is Windows SkyDrive. If you're using Windows SkyDrive, basically they provide a virtual machine, hardware, operating systems that's controlled through a service API, and that's it. That's all they offer, nothing else. All right, you got that? All right. So who has what responsibility? So this is a nice little chart I got from the PCI documentation, SAS, PAS, and IAS. I don't want to say AS. IAS, I guess IAS. I'm silly sometimes. But and I'm trying to make it a little interesting for you, right? As you can see in this slide, SAS has the responsibility primarily on the clouds, has the most responsibility as a cloud service provider. PAS has about 50%, 50-50, and the client owns most of the responsibility, as you can see with IAS, yeah. Don't charge it to my heart, charge it to my head. All right, that's what they say when you make a mistake. All right, so here's a better example of responsibility by requirements. So if you look at the requirements for PCI, here they are, all laid out for you. Who owns what? This is a really good slide. So as it relates to maintaining a firewall configuration, if you got infrastructure as a service, both of you, PASS, both of you, but software as a service, this CSP is the cloud service provider. And you can go down this list and see that. I'm gonna give you a little time to look at it. Now, if you have any questions about any of these, just let me know. Do you want an example? Okay, I'll give you an example. Let's take requirement 3 is to protect card holder data. So this requirement is centered around encryption of data at rest. The cloud service provider can provide this under IaaS and PAAS, right? It is their responsibility to provide the encryption technology, but the client must verify keys exist and they adhere to the standard of the rotation of those encryption keys. So if you're doing PCI, you understand what I just said. If you're not, then you probably, if you're new to it, then just hit me up and I'll give you more information. Now under SaaS, the cloud service provider owns all of the responsibility. It is Google Docs' responsibility to provide encryption of data saved, if so agreed, by you and them. So make sure you look at your service level agreements or your SOAs, service operation agreement. So let's look at requirement 4. That's centered around data transmission, right? Encrypt transmission of cardholder data. The transmission of data from a public site to the CSP should be both the responsibility of the client and CSP under PAS. As you can see, the connection between the two is a shared responsibility under PAS, but it is solely the client's responsibility under IaaS. The client is only using the processing and storage under IaaS, right? So, but it is the responsibility for the transmission of the data for the client under IaaS. All right, you got that? Okay, I'll move on. Responsibility by layer. You know how you have your presentation layers and your data transmission layer and your network layer. Well, let's do that as it relates to the cloud. Here are your cloud layers. And based on which service level agreement you have or your service model, the responsibility may remain with you or with the client service provider or both of you. And you can see that here. All right, so the main thing you need to know is that clients utilizing a public or otherwise shared cloud must rely on the CSP to ensure that their environment is adequately isolated from other client environments. All right, so you're relying on the CSP to make sure that your data is not touching any of their data. So it can be separated physically, it can be separated in a number of different ways, but it needs to be separated virtually. You can have partitions, logically separation, actual servers in different locations. So the second bullet, in addition to enforcing separation between client environments, segmentation may also be desired within a client's environment to isolate their CDE components. So you may be separating data from other clients that cloud service provider may have, but you also need to separate your credit card data within your own cloud from your other data, right? So it needs to be segmented. And if it's not, then everything is in scope. Your entire infrastructure is in scope. Wherever that segmentation is not occurring, you will be in scope. And that's basically what this next slide is saying. A segmented cloud environment exists when the client service provider enforces isolation between client environments. So this is basically what I was just talking about: physical separation, virtual separation, running their applications in separate logical partitions. So these are the different ways you can do segmentation. But if you don't do it in accordance to this screen, you will have a non-segmented cloud environment. And when you have that, everything is in scope, basically. You don't want this because, first of all, it takes longer, it's going to cost more, and you're going to find more issues. So you want to put your CDE in a separate location so that you are not opening yourself up to extensive testing and extensive findings. And plus, it just makes sense so that you can protect your client's credit card data, right? That just makes sense. All right. Remember, I showed you this in the very beginning because this is how you segment. This is how you make sure that your data stays safe in the cloud. And again, even in your own infrastructure, there are times when you want to use each and every last single one of these bullet items. So we've talked about these a little bit: physical firewalls, segmentation, strong two-factor authentication, separation of duties, continuous logging and monitoring, IPS, DLPs, zoning. These are the things you need to do. So this is really the end of my presentation, and you may be thankful that finally, okay, I've seen it all. I know everything. Well, not really. So these are the things that most of you all will deal with if you haven't. If you're planning on using, you thought that was the last slide? Okay, I lied. Just a little bit. I got a couple more if you want to watch. But some of the challenges when you are using the cloud include these 6 or 7 items. And I put an underline in the font for the 3 that I see happen most of the time. Clients may have little or no visibility into the cloud service provider underlying infrastructure. Happens all the time. Like you will not be able to go to every single facility where they host your data because a lot of those CSPs are worldwide, and that's part of their redundancy strategy. They may not allow you to have audits on site. That can be an issue. So these are I call it the elephant in the room, because these are the things that nobody really wants to talk about, but is actually crucial that you know this before you sign up with your CSP. All right, so how do you minimize the scope? We talked about segmentation to help minimize that scope, but there's some other things you can do, like don't store, process, or transmit credit card data in the cloud. You will minimize your scope if you don't do that. Implement a dedicated physical infrastructure. Minimize your use of third-party CSPs in protecting credit card data. So these are some of the 3 things that you can do. You can look at this at your leisure. You can pause the video and check it out. And there is one other thing. These are the next videos I plan on making if you are interested. Cloud computing architecture, cloud benefits, cloud computing threats, hijacking cloud services. So there are about 10 different ways you can hijack cloud services. I've been successful in 2 or 3 of those ways, really 4, but I'll just stick with 2 or 3. And there are some benefits to, having your data in the cloud. But that first one, cloud computing architecture, I'll just give you a little tease. This is how a cloud architecture looks. You have the consumer, you have the provider, you have the broker, you have the carrier. And so the carrier is responsible for connectivity, the broker, service aggregation, the cloud consumer, cloud auditing. So if you are the consumer and you're purchasing cloud, you are responsible for the auditing of it as well. The cloud provider, they're going to provide all of the business management, physical resources, the buildings, and depending again on your service level agreement, it's going to provide some of the things we talked about earlier in this video. So I will stop there. I won't go into all of my other labs and threats and benefits. I'll just stop right here. But I appreciate you taking time to watch. If you have any questions, just send me a message. Thanks. I'm Ron Wilkie, the cybersecurity quarterback, and we are done. Finally.